probably the last session of the day. And I wanted to thank everybody for joining or staying around, or if we're the only session, thank you for joining this. I would assume people are familiar with the tool. There's a chat tool, and there should be also a QA tool. So if you have questions, please put them in either the chat or the QA tool, and we will try to get to them either as we go, or we'll try and leave time for the end. I wanted to thank the sponsors for this session. Siemens, Fortinet, TCG, Verve, Trend Micro, Edolis, Key Factor, Schneider Electric, and Building Cybersecurity Organization. IIoT World is the leading authority on industrial IoT. IIoT World is a digital media outlet bringing the latest industrial Internet of Things, virtual conferences, and content to a global community of 279,000 plus decision makers and influencers. So given that as an intro, we have 5 people who I consider to be experts. And I wanted to point out one thing. What's missing in the title that we're really going to is we have all of this expertise, tools, and technology. Why haven't we solved the industrial control system cybersecurity problems yet? So in a funny sense, it was missing that first thing. We have this, why aren't we there yet? Given that, I wanted to just mention a couple of things and then we're going to start. The first is, this is coming in a sense from my experience of going to the big RSA conference in San Francisco every year, where I would see, 500 or 1,000 cybersecurity companies, each of which had really, really, really good cybersecurity technology or tools. And I kept thinking, with all of this out there, how in the world can we have cyber events? And then I'd walk out of the Moscone Center, and the first thing I'd find out is, or I'd be listening to, is another set of cybersecurity attacks. And it's like, how can that be when you've got all of this around? You see the same thing with ransomware, and its impacts on operational companies. Again, I'm not saying operational networks. So the lead into all of this is we have a set of questions. Before we start, I'm going to put up a couple of polling questions for people on the panel to understand who is in the audience. So maybe we can kind of tailor what we're saying based on that. Lucian, can you put up the first polling question? So what I'm basically asking, who do you represent? IT, OT, engineering, management, or others? So give you maybe 30 seconds or so, just fill that out and send it back. And then Lucian can compile it.
I give it about 10 more seconds.
Okay. All righty. The second poll is, what type of organization? Okay, so this is interesting. Can everybody see the results?
Yes.
And part of the reason this is important is when you see who's there, that also factors into a lot of what we're actually talking about here. Why haven't we got there yet? Look at, if you will, the percentages of people and where they're from. Okay. Next slide is going to be the next poll, which is where are you from? What type of organization are you from? Lucian, can you put that next slide, that next poll up? Or do I need to close this? Can you put up that next one? Okay. Well, we're having troubles with that. The poll was really trying to ask, oh, there it is. What type of organization do you represent? Are you an end user, regardless of industry or anything else? Are you an engineering equipment supplier, a Schneider, a GE, a Honeywell, etc.? Are you a cybersecurity equipment supplier? You know, big or small? Are you a Dragos, a Clarity, you know, or you know, any of the others, big or small? Are you in the consulting world? Are you government, or are you other? So give you maybe about another, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds. And this will give us, I think, a better idea of who are we talking to. Lucian, you'll tell me when we're ready.
5 more seconds and we'll end the poll.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Again, this will give you a better idea. And from what I'm seeing here, this is reasonably typical of sessions I've attended or participated in. One of it is that the engineering and the engineering equipment suppliers are generally, you know, have the least participation. And when you think about the fact that we're talking about quote unquote OT or engineering, there's a message there. So with that, what I want to do now is just quickly mention who our panelists are. And then I'm just gonna, I'll just start just by how it's shown. So Richard, I'll have you go first. Let's see, Trish, you go second. Arthur, you go third. Derek, you go fourth. And what I want you to do before you answer the first question is just give a really quick summary of who you are and where you're coming from. So the real question is, why do you think, even though we're experiencing an exponential rise in cyber attacks, you know, particularly ransomware, why isn't what we've got, in a sense, mitigating or helping or stopping? Why is it, you know, continuing to increase? Richard, before you answer, just give a really quick capsule of who you are and what you're doing.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Welcome everyone, and my name is Richard Koo. I'm with Trend Micro and TX1 Networks. I kind of wear two hats for the companies. Been in the industry for a little bit over 30 plus years. The first 25 years are really spending on basically the development, marketing, selling of cybersecurity product across, you know, all the IT, you know, segment, everything from consumer to small business to very large enterprise customer. And then over the last 5 years, I'm very much, I think, focused on the business development, sales, and marketing on our adaptive cybersecurity solution for industrial control and automations. And that's what my focus is. And we particularly focus a lot on verticals such as manufacture, oil and gas, power, healthcare, and transportation, and as well as some government and device manufacturer. Specifically working with some of these companies to basically build security into their platform or into their devices. And I also a member of the ISA. So I work with working group number 9 and part of the working group number 8. Try to basically better define cybersecurity framework and best practice for the industrial control and automation. So that's just a little bit about myself. George, you want us to go and answer your question?
Yeah,
also?
let me ask it again. Why do you think, despite the technologies that you've been developing and the outreach you've been doing all of these years, why do you think we're still having this exponential rise in successful, because that's the other point, successful attacks? And what do you think we need to do to try to stop that? That's the question I'm going to ask of all of you.
Yeah, so I'll respond that. I mean, I'm not surprised, right? And there's a couple of things that to keep in mind, right? I think that industrial control system and networks have been around for many decades, right? But when you look at it from an industrial cybersecurity perspective, right, it's kind of in the infancy stage, right? And only within the last, I would say, couple of years, where organizations think about cybersecurity, cyber threats in the industrial and OT environment. So I think, and of course, due to all this new technology and transformation, so that's kind of a challenge for everyone as well. I think also from a roles responsibility perspective, right, on the OT IT, that's, I think, is not completely clear, right? And so having this type of challenge within the organization, that can also create a lot of challenge in terms of coming up with a good cyber strategy in there. And then last but not least, I would say many of the legacy system, the application, the flat networks, right, are also very difficult, for organization to implement in taking new technology, especially like the cybersecurity, because most of these networks and the system was never really designed with security built in, right? So I think this is a couple of things, and maybe last is probably in the ransomware, right, or at least in the cyber space, right, there is monetary gain, right? And I think that's why you're going to see more and more of this, and you'll continue to see some of this. So that's just a quick thoughts on this question.
Okay, thanks. Trish, you want to go next? Quick
Yes.
introduction and then.
Sure. So I am Trish McGill. I am an SME in cybersecurity for IT in both OT. I've been around in IT and OT for about 20 years now. I have a military background and mainly work with oil and gas, chemical industry, manufacturing. I'm a consultant, so I give advice, I help implement, and I steer, direct, build roadmaps, etc. So, and I'm based in the Netherlands right now. And if you want to compare a little bit, I mean, I want to answer your question, but I also want to compare a little bit the difference between EMEA, the Americas, and also other continents. What I see, there's really still a lag between EMEA, for instance, and if you compare it with the Americas, they are still behind here in Europe with understanding what exactly needs to be done to protect OT, to protect the industry, which is weird because when you look at the digitalization, they're really far, far ahead here. So you see that the digitalization is going rapidly here, but the point of cybercrime and actually defending against it is not up to speed yet. And to answer your question as to, well, why are the attacks successful? Well, apparently it's possible because apparently, the OT environments have not sufficiently protected themselves to prevent or at least alert and register on them. I think it's definitely a lack of understanding, a lack of communication between board level, cybersecurity teams, and also the actual guys and girls on site, on the plant. It's very easy to help executives build a business case and address the top 5 risks of an organization, but you need to be able to translate this also into the factory floor. You really have to know how to speak the language. You have to understand the processes that are running. You have to understand that production and safety is number 1. So I think there's a translation between all those layers to better implement and embed solutions and tools to make them sustainable. Because we can wheel in a lot of tools and be secure today, but if we don't make it sustainable and not actually have an operating model also for our OT environment, then it will be non-reoccurring. And in a few months, you're right back to square one.
Thank you. Being the moderator, I get to throw one thing in. About, 5-6 years ago, I was invited to a conference in the Netherlands. basically with Oleander and the Dutch government on smart grid. And what I found in Europe is the focus is on privacy. The focus is not on safety or reliability, it's on privacy. And that's just my personal take on what I find, because the ultimate irony is I happen to be the managing director of ISA 99. When we started 99 almost 20 years ago, it was fundamentally the major, oil, gas, and petros that were behind it. I was still EPRI at the time. I was the electric part, but primarily it was the big, and they were very, there was an awful lot of Eurocentric things there. So you have the end users who were worried about safety versus the governments that are worried about privacy. That's just kind of my observations. So I want to go to the next one. Arthur, quickie little background and then your response.
Okay, I'm Arthur Karp. 31 years ago, I founded Quantalytics as a network VAR and systems integration firm. In those early days, we started. Over time, we grew. Our practice expanded across multiple segments, including factories. And 9 years ago, I recognized a radical hardware breakthrough, systems on a chip, SOC, not Security Operations Center, and decided internally to develop our own line of network security appliances, because I thought, and have been vindicated, that we can do a better job than the incumbents with providing network security through a family of hardware appliances, as well as, of course, virtual machines. Now, as to, and you can get the details on our website, of course, for everything. And part of the problem, as I see it, is the incumbents. We do not consider ourselves the incumbents. We're the mammals scurrying amongst the feet of the dinosaurs. I shall give you an example, which Richard Q is going to have an ulcer over. As is my custom weekly, I review, about my background also. I just want to add that I'm a member of CISA's ICS joint working group, and also the EU's CERT at Circle, their equivalent to the US CERT, with full membership, just like Trend Micro. Now coming back to Trend Micro, as is my custom and practice, we get in the CISA news bulletin every week on the latest of CVE issues, including the uncharacterized ones. This one, this week, which was released October 4, covering the week of September 27, featured Trend Micro's Server Protect product, which is one of your flagship products, with a CVE of 10.0, which means even my high school interns, taking in interns from time to time, could have great sport. If you didn't know, it's CVE-2021-36745. And why I say it's the incumbents, they in general do a very poor job internally doing security DevOps. They do development, but they don't have a culture yet that's really good in baking in security. And it's not just Trend Micro. Schneider appears there regularly, GE, Honeywell, all of the usual suspects. And so one of the problems that needs to be addressed is that the vendors have to do a better job baking in security. We have something called Quantalytics Diamond Hard. You can't crack our products. You're welcome to try. So in terms of the dysfunctional connect between OT and IT, a big part of that is cultural, not speaking the same languages. The IT people don't understand OT yet, and the OT don't understand the IT. I watched, for example, a comment right now about firewalls don't do the job to protect something as opposed to air gapping. Well, guess what? Firewall's the wrong tool. It should be a proxy server that does it, not a firewall. And I don't know how many people outside of specialists such as myself know what MQTT communication is, so that you can safely send a message out from an OT network into an IT network. There are whole technologies where a great deal more education needs to be done. But you have this disconnect in terms of language. I completely agree with Joe. This should be almost 100% engineers. No offense to everybody else. Engineers are grossly underrepresented, and they need to learn a new language, the IT language of cybersecurity, so they can take it back home and apply it. And it's got to be applied. And coming back to ransomware attacks, there was a famous bank robber in the US back in the 20s, Willie Sutton, who was asked, why did he rob so many banks? And I quote the late Mr. Willie Sutton, that's because that's where the money is.
Okay. Now, okay. The last one, Derek,
Sure.
before you go, just one other thing.
Yeah.
Derek is really coming more, if you will, from, if you will, a, rather than me put it in, I'll let you do it, but introduce yourself and then your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. I think I know where you were gonna go, and it's definitely a good segue from my background. So I started introduced to cybersecurity through my military service, and for the last 25 years have been principally starting or co-founding or investing in cybersecurity startups. And somewhere along the way, about 6 years ago, I accidentally started a meeting in Atlanta, Georgia, of people who cared about control system related security. And at the time, it was really to meet people where I lived that, cared about this. But it has morphed into now a 22,000 person workforce development nonprofit association. And that's what I'm doing. So technology has always been super fascinating to me, but I've spent recent years focusing more and more on the human being problems. So it's the association is called the Control Systems Cybersecurity Association International, or CS2AI.org. And so that's the segue probably where Joe was headed. I am looking at less at technology issues. They're real. There's things, obviously, there's experts on this panel and experts out there working on various issues that need to be solved through technology. But the workforce problem is significant. And so I think with Joe's opening question of why are we in this fix? Putting ransomware aside, which is highly profitable, so that's probably why we're seeing a lot of it. We've got a significant workforce issue, and it's not just we don't have enough people. That's a piece of it, but we also have huge dysfunction. So through the work I'm doing now with the nonprofit and doing surveying and doing interviewing, and back when I was selling a product and going into companies, it's been the same for the last a decade. Huge dysfunction with organizations, both vertically, from management levels of management, boards, let's say, all the way down to people that have to deal with the consequences of some of this. And then also horizontally between different parts of a company. This group not trusting that group, not to use any acronyms, but we know what some of them are. So I think that's the area I'm most focused on. And I'll just say, when I had a product to sell, I did experience something more than once where I could have given it to an organization for free and they couldn't have operationalized it. And that was in hindsight. And that was a huge moment for a software entrepreneur, for a technology entrepreneur. I was like, wow. And the sale is going to be difficult in this case because they don't have enough of the basic foundation in place.
Number one, I wanted to say thank you to all, because I think this was a really interesting, group type of thing. And again, today, one of the things that was out there was Honeywell with their Experion. Again, I'm not trying to, point at anybody, but when you start looking at the ICS, CERT notifications, all of our major vendors continue to have these notifications. And so it's an ongoing thing. I think one of them that I found the most ironic, this was maybe a year or two ago, and I won't even name the name of the vendor, it was one of our major vendors. It was, of all things, their security service, of all things, had cyber problems and had a, CERT notification. And much of what we're talking about is really where Derek is going. And Derek, you're exactly right. That's how I was going to try to introduce you.
Yeah.
I really honestly believe when it comes to the control system cyber world, technology is important, but if we can't get the people problems and the culture problems there, it won't matter. And what's even more, and Derek, you kind of mentioned this, if you don't solve the people problem will break any technology or simply not use it properly. And how many times do you have, quote unquote, a fully secure system? And it was somebody doing something dumb or stupid that opened a door to a seemingly impenetrable, think of SolarWinds. With
We have
everything they
a
had
name
there.
well, excuse me, we have a saving for that. We call these oops moments.
Yes. We have many. I was going to ask Lucian if you could put up the next poll, because it's really asking, are the engineering organizations directly involved in your cybersecurity program? And it's simply a yes, no. But I think this will go a really long way toward, again, we had the initial poll showing that the organization least represented for this session was engineering. So anyways, this is a real quick one. Lucian, do you want to give me more time or just see what that pops up as?
Just give it about 6 more seconds. Thanks everyone participating. We're about 17%, so normally it's about half of what we normally are. So people perhaps are multitasking. This is a good way to bring everyone back.
Yeah, and the point I wanted to get across here, even though it's a little, this isn't asking is quote unquote OT. It's really, are your engineering organizations involved?
All right, there. Then we're gonna stop and share the results. Here we go.
That's more than I thought. That's good. That's still a really big number when we're talking about quote unquote OT or control system cybersecurity, that almost 60% of the respondents don't have their engineering organizations involved. The official major message there. Derek, I'll bet that's probably somewhat consistent with what you're seeing.
Yeah, if not even a high amount of engineering involvement.
Yeah, and part of it is I should have been more explicit that I'm really talking engineering, not quote unquote just OT. Okay, now I wanted to ask one other question, next poll, and it's really, I think most people will acknowledge that one of the biggest holes in cybersecurity is remote access. So the question on the next one is, are you using remote access to get to your control system networks? This, again, part of this is just asking, how big is our problem?
All right, folks, 5 more seconds. Thanks for taking the survey. Thanks for being with us today. Thank you all the panelists for the great insights sharing, try to educate and address this problem. Okay, here are the results.
You know, and again, I would think to all of you that these numbers shouldn't be, you know, surprising. Add to that the pandemic. I was just reading, I forget which one of the magazines, that was talking about remote access, and they were trying to figure out, has it actually gone up or has it actually gone down? And part of it is, how are we defining remote access? But the next poll I wanted to throw out, because I wanted to get this out and then throw it back to the panelists in terms of your thoughts on what you're seeing here. The next one is, and it's really dealing with, in a funny sense, it's going to go to the next point about, in a funny sense, why are we seeing so much of the ransomware? And part of that is, like what Arthur says, that's where we have the logging. So can you put up the next poll? So it's basically, again, what it's really asking is, how many of you are actually monitoring with some form of forensics? It said log analysis, SIM, but whatever. How many are really monitoring your OT network so that you would actually know if something is going on?
This scratches back my earlier in my career when we were trying to give access to folks that are changing business models towards a subscription model. So just bypassing the firewalls to be able to give remote access, so they can say, all right, we send you the machine and you haven't really purchased from us at such, you got 30 more days or 20 days to stop it.
Yeah. By the way, somebody
There's
just
a
brought
reason
up,
why they do it, right? But there's risk with that.
somebody just brought up a really good point on the chat. And that is, it isn't so much how many are just monitoring. What I didn't ask, which is what the person brought up, how many are actually reviewing the logs? So
Well,
the fact
what
that you're
Dean does-
logging is one thing. The next question is, are you even looking?
But this is what
Funny
SIEM
statement.
analysis will do for you, Joe. It'll give you alerts for the anomalies.
Well, this isn't cyber, but just to give you a thing about reviewing or actions. What I just read, they had that very, very big oil spill off of LA. And apparently they had leak detection. And the leak detection alarms told them there was a problem. But it was another 4 or 5 hours or more before anybody did anything about it. So it's really a two-part problem. Number one, are you even monitoring? And then number two, are you doing anything about what you were monitoring? The last question I'm going to put up in this series is, are you using honeypots? In other words, are you looking to find out, are people really trying to attack you? But on your OT networks, technology exists. We have at least 2 people on this panel that do and have done honeypots. What I'm really asking, how pervasive is it, that people are doing this?
Joe, if you don't mind explaining, what exactly is a honeypot? I'm sorry, I've been in the field for a while, but I'm not sure I get it.
Okay, I'm going to give you my answer as a non-honeypot expert. And between Richard and Arthur, we have a couple of people who would be considered experts.
It looks like Edward raised his hand as well, so it seems like there are people in the audience that ask the same question.
Yeah, basically it is a quote unquote, a artificial network set up to look like the real network, but it's not connected. And so what you're doing is basically trying to find out how many people think they are actually attacking your network, but really aren't. So what you're doing is trying to give the bad guys, you're tempting them, saying, hey, here is my manufacturing or my OT network. And it looks just like it, but it really isn't. So what you're doing is trying to find out, in a funny sense, how many people are really looking to do harm to you.
Thank you. And Edward, if you're in our audience, please pose your question in the Q&A. I saw you raising your hands, but that's the way we're doing it. And everybody else, please final question and Q&A, we are actually giving everybody access to 12 months in the VIP community. So we're incentivizing folks to be engaged and ask questions there. So thanks.
By the way, Richard or Arthur, if either of you want to add anything, what you had is just my perception.
Yes. Network obfuscation, hiding your assets in plain sight. Properly configured, you're not just showing one fake. You can show 100 fakes and have your one real and give the attacker the dilemma of which one do I probe? You've taken the odds from 1 to 1 to 1 in 101. Because if they probe the wrong one, it's an alert, because the only reason anybody would be probing or touching it is if they're hacking. There's no legitimate other reason to do it. So it is a tripwire, and it's also a way to hide your real network assets. Because without a honeypot, to use an example that some of you might know, it's like painting all of your stuff pink green like Mary Kay Cadillacs. Easy to see. And in contrast, US military, every military uses camouflage and spends, in our case, millions of dollars to develop camouflage for weapons, for uniforms, for ships, you name it. So my question to you collectively is, why aren't you using the military as the successful example and practicing the art of camouflage to help protect your assets?
For what it's worth, two things. One is Richard and I wrote a paper, what about 6-8 months ago? And it had turned out that Trend had performed a full manufacturing system, honeypot. But what I found even more interesting about, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, this Kyle Wilhoit did a honeypot. And what it was supposedly a small rural water utility in Missouri. It was a nothing in the middle of nowhere. And it was being attacked from China, Russia, the Middle East, you name it. It was, it was really amazing that, people keep thinking you got to be big and you got to be important for anybody to look at you. This was deliberately a small little rural water utility in Missouri, and it was being hammered from everywhere.
Hey, Joe, besides the honeypot that, we all talk about, right? If you have access to, let's say, Shodan, right? The networks, when you go to Shodan, you pretty much can see all the different, I would say IT networks or OT networks that have been exposed, right, in the internet. And so, even if we don't have a honeypot, by looking at some of those data point and you're seeing all the different type of exposed system and device out there in the Shodan, kind of give you a pretty good idea, right, as to what type of attacks out there. And so that's another good area you can actually see, and you can also see those information by vertical or by sectors as well. So Shodan's a good area also for you guys to take a look at it as well. But at least in terms of our honeypot, we have create basically a smart manufacturing networks that very much include all the different type of device, everything from a router to a HMI machine to PLCs and DCS system, as well as some, basically kind of robotics and the end device and stuff like that, and create almost like a real companies, right? And what we found was that, within the first, couple weeks of the honeypot that was being put live into the internet, we start seeing attacks coming from, many different, area of the world, right? Everything from Europe to the, Middle East to, so that will give you a good experience as to, if you are being attacked or not. But that's just what we did for that manufactured honeypots.
Ours are intended to help you hide your assets. Not so, you use them, of course, to learn more about the threats against you, but they act as a tripwire because if somebody gets through your IDS, which they can and have, look at SolarWinds as a prime example of living off the land after getting through IDS. This is part of what we call defense in depth, layers, layer after layer, to make your network harder to penetrate, more work for the adversary, less interesting for the adversary, and higher likelihood of being detected before they're successful. In terms of difficulty, we've simplified matters. One of the participants said they're very difficult. Not anymore. Not anymore.
Okay, I wanted to do two things because I'm also cognizant of time. We've got three, what I think are really, really good questions that I want to be able to get to. But before that, I wanted to follow up on something that Trish brought up, which is in a sense our last question, and it's leading to the last poll question. And that is, are your boards involved with OT cybersecurity decisions? And so that's the poll question. And you may or may not know that, but like to get the answer, because the follow on to that is, if not, how do we get them involved? So this is what I call the C-suite or the board level. Are they involved with these control system / OT cybersecurity decisions? I think we know they are on IT. The real question, are they on quote unquote OT? And Trish had brought that up earlier.
You want one of us to speak, Joe? Is that?
Yeah, oh, please do. I was just waiting.
Okay, I thought we were waiting on the poll. I'm sorry.
I was waiting for the poll.
Here they are, results coming up right now.
Okay, yeah, I was trying to be
Yeah,
a good one, Derek. I was trying
okay.
to wait on.
Yeah.
Okay, Derek, because you've been more at the organizational level, what are your thoughts on these numbers?
They seem a little potentially a little high. And I wonder if there was an answer of, do not know, how many answers people would answer that. Do not know. There's definite improvement. And the only thing I can say is I remember 3 years ago, a great opportunity I had to sit down with a mentor and advisor who was on a board of one of the larger oil and gas companies in the world. And he talked about his tenure on the board. And so 3 years ago, he was telling me, we started on the board, in his board position. He said, we never talked about this topic. He said, and then in the last few years while he was still on the board, it was addressed, or it was a component of every single board meeting. So, that's anecdotal because that's just, a story, but I thought that was very interesting. I mean, talking essentially, let's say 10 years ago to 3 years ago, as a 6-year period, I think, not at all being discussed to it is now part of each board meeting, at least on the agenda. And I think what we've seen, I don't know, I don't want to go out and say we've quantified it yet, but I think what we've seen is there is more of that starting to happen, or people being invited to address the board, whether it's a CISO or whatever the title is, the senior decision maker over this area of cybersecurity, being invited to speak to the board on a quarterly basis. So I'm not going to hang any bell on that and say, look, oh, great, that's great, it's working. But those things do seem to be bubbling up.
I just want to reinforce one thing that Derek is bringing up. Everything we're talking about here is anecdotal. And so what you're seeing is, I think, reflective, but quote unquote, is it statistically relevant? Hard to tell. But at least I'm looking at this, everybody on the panel has been around the block in this area for quite a while. And so your anecdotal observations to me are pretty reflective of what's out there.
Hey, Joe, I do
Yeah, so
agree.
Joe, oh,
Yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Trish.
Ted, Richard, and then Trish.
Yeah,
Sorry?
I do agree with Derek a little bit, right? Because the number seems to be high. I mean, at least from my experience, we are making some small steps, right, reaching the board level and in the decision maker. But I think we still have a long way to go, right? I mean, the only time that you can really have that conversation, at least from my experience, is that when you have an incident, like say, for example, the Colonial pipeline attacks or some of the say energy sectors have been attacked, then people to think about it. But once that I would say news and that type of information kind of dry down, then people start to basically don't have such a strong I think conversation on this topic. So I believe that this is really just the beginning, or we still have a long way to go to really reach the sea level and make sure that they truly understand the challenge they have to face.
Trish?
Yeah, so I agree with Derek and Richard too. I think the numbers are high. It would be good if it really is the case, but I can definitely say in EMEA, it's absolutely not the case. And if a board is involved and is actually knowledgeable and understands the risk and also the impact on operations and safety again, then there's still a disconnect between board, middle management, and the actual sites. So it's either that you get the awareness on the site, maybe locally on a plant, or you get the awareness of a board. But the whole chain of awareness is missing. And I think that's why it's so difficult to actually embed cybersecurity also in the operational environment.
Thanks.
I believe,
I just
I
want to
believe-
mention one thing, Arthur. Derek, you're right. I made a mistake. I should have on this one question had a don't know. I was so intent on having a yes, no, but on this one, there also should have been a don't know. So I don't know, quote unquote, how that reflects on that answer.
Yeah, Joe, I will say that on all the surveying that we do, which we do now a lot, there's a healthy quotient of don't know to so many questions. And I
Yes.
take that as an indicator of health and wellness, if you want. If there's so many questions can be answered by don't know, that means information and knowledge sharing is not working.
I agree with you. I just hadn't thought about it when I did this.
Yeah.
Arthur?
I'm highly skeptical of those numbers based on our conversations with various boards. What the boards of directors need is a change of culture too. They have audit committees for financial audits. They have compensation committees to decide who gets paid what and how. They have diversity committees to make sure that even polka-dotted people are well represented. But they do not have a cybersecurity audit committee. And it's just as important as financial side. I could even argue more important, because if your security is shot and you're held for ransom like CNA, and you pony up 40 million in ransom, well, the shareholders are not going to want you. So the boards also need a structural change. In addition to an audit committee, cybersecurity committee, so that they get a report every month on where their posture is. And if they don't know what questions to ask, bring in a consultant. That's what Trish and company do. Consult.
There's one thing that someone in the chat has brought up that I think is important. It is a two-directional thing. So like it's not like the board doesn't get it. If you do get access to the board, if you do get access to talk to them, do your work to talk in their language.
Of course.
It's blown when you go and get there and talk about this technology or that technology. They've got a limited amount of time. You need to talk about risk, and so get with the right people and prepare for that moment in the sun when you do get it, because it's not useful to talk only in your own language versus learning what's my audience need to hear.
That's why we have a chief marketing officer. I'm not the one that does the talking. he does. I speak pure geek.
Well, my comments were not addressed to you, Arthur. I was just saying, boy, when he does get a chance.
But yeah,
they need to
Derek,
learn
you're
my language.
right. There, what Derek is saying is the point, it's about the enterprise risk. The enterprise risk for the board, and we all have to be able to translate that back down to what cyber impact that has, all the way down to the sites and the plans. Yeah.
And I'll just leave this as last point. Several years ago, I gave a keynote at a food cybersecurity conference. And they had a bunch of CISOs from the different food manufacturing, food companies. And the discussion was, how does the CISO talk to the board? They were having this discussion from the CISO to the board. Well, after I had given my presentation on control system cyber, there was an epiphany. The epiphany was the CISO goes, I don't know how to talk to the engineers. And so what happens is, Derek, as you were saying, or Trish, or I forget, but it's a chain. And the links aren't really well established along that chain. And until we get it there, we're not going to be successful. And I think one of the things to realize, this is just an example from my side. One of the major utility companies had, as a member of their board of directors, they needed somebody from cybersecurity. Who did they get? They got the CISO from, in this point in time, I'll throw a name, from Comcast. Now, yes, they had somebody on the board that speaks cybersecurity, but that somebody who spoke cybersecurity had no idea what a pipeline was, what a power plant was, what an electric substation was, or anything else. So there's plenty of opportunity to try to figure out, how do we be able to get people to talk to each other? It has to be risk. There's no two ways around it, but they have to understand what the risk means. So I know we're getting close to the end. Lucian, how much time do we have?
Joe, you have about 5 minutes.
So we've got a bunch of questions that I know we're not going to have time to answer. How do you want to handle that?
So while everybody's thinking about how do we handle that,
I'm typing the answer.
everybody will take it off and create a blog or video answers, but let's try to get as many as we can in the next 5-6 minutes. Sorry about that.
Okay,
Thanks.
one of them, the first one I think is a very interesting question. And it's what solution do you propose for old equipment that have old versions of Windows software, or whatever, in other words, that are not supported? And that's an issue in the control system world, where you have old versions that are supporting obsolete equipment that can't be replaced.
Oh, yes. But this is where network access control can play a huge role. NAC defines who, what gets to reach where, what privileges, access to what services or not. So an implementation of NAC means you can keep that Windows XP box as long as you feed it electricity live and well, but also secured in a fashion that you cannot do any other way.
Hey,
So-
Joe, there are a lot of technology out there today that you can secure, all those, I would say, old machine like Windows XP or Windows 7 or even Windows 2000, right? Because those has been around for decades, and it will continue to be around for maybe a few more decades. So there are tools and technologies out there, everything from whitelisting product that you can implement, or you can implement technologies as IPS capabilities, some virtual patching, all those different technologies that are out there in the market today, right? And I think every organization should take that opportunity and go out and look at some of these technologies, because we, for example, as a cybersecurity company, we provide security solution across all different type of use case, everything from having a say old operating system or old application to basically system that have been around for decades, or the latest greatest let's say operating system. So there are a lot of technologies out there already. So I think everyone should go out and start to look for it, and not necessarily not say, hey, nothing's out there, because there are a lot of technology already out there in market.
By the way, that was the whole point of our the title to begin with, is we have all of these technologies. Why aren't people using them? We have all of this expertise. Why are they not using them? Because we're going to, in the operational world, equipment stays until it needs to be replaced because it's obsolete or it can't meet its function or it's broken. And that can be that equipment can easily be 20 or 30 years old.
Yeah, and I think, about the technology side, right? I think that's just one story. I think I do want to go back to Derek, right? Where we talk about the people, the process and the culture. And I think technology in itself, right, is really just the one piece of the bigger, I think, solution we need to address, right? But you got the people, the process, I think the cultures, and those three key components also, I think is very important for every organization to address, right, before you start to implement the technology.
What Richard says, you have to embed the actual, not just the tooling, but see the tooling as a solution, as a service. You have to embed it in the organization, make it sustainable and operational, and ongoingly monitor what you're doing. It's not a one-time thing.
Exactly. Yes.
By the way, this is part of why this panel is so important, is you need the technologists, the solution providers, and you also need the consultants, and you need, the other thing is the organizationalists. How do you get the organization to work together? And all too often, I see sessions that are only one part of the puzzle. And Derek, you brought up that really great point. You could have given away, I know what technology you had. You could have given it away and people still wouldn't have been able to use it.
Yeah.
And we have to figure out, how do we get there from here?
We do.
Yeah. I think, like I said, we are still in the very early, in the infancy stage when, on the, ICS or OT environment. And it's going to take us, more time to really get where we want to be, right? And secure every environment that we can. But until then, I think it's going to take us time and take everyone's time to really reach at least to a level where we feel a little bit more comfortable.
And we definitely need to invest in the awareness also of our OT engineers and our sites and our plants. They also need more awareness on how things are happening in the modern IT world, and the whole convergence is just very important that all sides have that awareness.
And the flip is what we've been talking about. There's this push that Trish, you're bringing up, of what do you do with all of this newer modern technology? Trying to push the engineers to learn. The flip side is we have all of this older technology that the network people don't want to learn because they think it's obsolete dinosaur stuff. And guess what? That's going to be there for the next 5 to 10 years at least. Yep. And this is where things are broken.
This is where network access control can patch it by restricting it so that you don't have old equipment being a huge security hole. Instead, it's tightly controlled, which is not the case currently. Currently, it's a huge security hole. So that's where NAC is crucial. And you can keep using it until the stuff dies. We know we got people with 20-plus-year-old XP systems happily chugging away, but securely.
Richard, I get the feeling we're probably out of time and you've got the session. So I just wanted to thank the panelists for their observations and expertise. And our sponsors, Siemens, Fortinet, TCG, Verb, Trend Micro, ADOLAS, Key Factors, Schneider Electric, and Building Cybersecurity Organization.